Hey there guys, TC Made with TC Gaming. Wanted to bring another video in the ACF series. And this one we're going to build a new interactable. It's going to be a campfire. And we're going to also build a couple of items, which is going to be some raw meat and some cooked meat. And we're going to build a recipe that requires a piece of raw meat and some firewood at a campfire to craft cooked meat. So let's go ahead and get into that and show you how that all works. If you're inside of the ACF project, a quick way to do this would actually be to grab an existing interactable item like this ACF chest, for example, and make some modifications to that to interact with it and do what we're about to do here. But I'm going to do this from the ground up to give you more of an understanding of how the system works. So the first thing we want to do is build our campfire. So let's go into basically anywhere in the project. I have a lot of stuff in my project that you won't have in yours just because I needed items and icons and things like that for this tutorial. So yours will be more like just what's in the full sample folder if that's where you're at. But what we want to do is we want to right click and we want to build a new blueprint. So we'll go to blueprint class, and this was just going to be a basic actor. And we'll call this ACF Campfire. And in our ACF Campfire, spelled incorrectly here. All right, in our ACF Campfire, in order to make this thing work, what we want to do is we want to add a static mesh component. And the static mesh for this is going to be the representation of our campfire. So I have an icon or an asset in here called campfire that I will use. You'll get your own somewhere. I got mine from the HyperRoots Ultimate Inventory package that I had, and I just brought all that stuff over here because it gives me a lot of things to work with to build pretty quickly. So here's the static mesh representation of that. And if we just throw this out into the world real quick just to see what's going on, you see that we just have a campfire. If I go over here and look at that campfire, it doesn't do anything, but it's just there on the ground. Okay. So in order for us to make that interactable, what we need to do is we need to add an interface to this system. And the system that we want to add in is, or the interface that we want to add in is the ACF interactable. So we will go into class settings in here, and under implemented interfaces, we want to hit add ACF interactable interface. And adding the ACF interactable interface will now give you a little expansion over here for ACF interactables. And you have a couple of different things here. So one of the things that's very important is that there's a thing called can be interacted. And if you want to be able to interact with this thing through your interactable interface, what you need to do is pop this open and set this return value to true. So what will happen is when the system bumps into this thing, it'll check to see if you can interact with it or not. And if you can, then it'll proceed on to the other functions that we'll put on here in just a second. So with just that on there, let me show you something. I'm going to put I'll put a breakpoint on here. I'm going to do this progressively so you can see how this is going. So if I come over here and I go through this, it doesn't do anything yet. It's not even registering to check if that can be interacted with. So what we want to do is to figure that piece out. And the reason it's not flagging this yet, there's a couple of possibilities. One is if you check your static mesh, you always want to make sure your static meshes actually have some type of collision on them. And most do, but you just want to double check to make sure that yours does. So if we go out here and look at our campfire and we go up to collision, actually you can go to view, that's right here rather, show. And you can say show simple or complex collision, and it does have collision on it. So we're good there. And then the other thing we want to do is on that static mesh item, we want to go and check the collision properties. And in here, we want to change our collision presets to be custom. And we use an object type pawn here. And what that'll do is it'll make it so that the traces that are in ACF can find this item. Okay, so we'll go back out here. And now we will go over and see if we trigger that can be interacted. And so just by flipping on the collision and making sure that we had collision on there and setting that property to true, what will happen now is it'll go into the next portion of this. So even just right there, you could start coding with this. But what we want to do is we want to go out here to our event graph and we want to go to our interfaces again. And what we want to do is to fire something to happen whenever we can interact with this, and it's registered by the pawn. So I'm going to right click on this and say implement event. So event on interactable registered by pawn. And I'm just going to put a little print string on here. And I'm just going to say I found a campfire. All right. And so this event now will get fired. And if I just run by the campfire, you just watch up in the top left-hand part of the screen, I found a campfire. And you also see that the little E window pops up to interact with that. If I hit E, nothing's going to happen though, because I don't have any actual interactions set up yet. So to set up the interaction, what we want to do is to go over here and say on interacted by pawn. And now what we want to do is we want to open up a widget. So if you don't know which widget to open up, there's one for crafting. It's a craftable widget. It's a WBP crafting, I believe. If you go out to your ACF full sample and type in craft, there's your WBP crafting. And this works the same way it does on any other widget. Basically, what you do is you cast to the character, and then you have that widget created on screen. But if you want a quick reference to that, you can also go over here, and there is a crafting sample vendor here. So we can go over here and just look at this guy. And you can see here that when we interact with the pawn, we're going to go and get the controller of the local pawn and return that as the object to cast to. And then as the player controller, we're going to display a widget called WBP crafting. And you can type that all in. Just very simple. You just say, you already have the event, right? So you would pull off of this and say get controller. We can do it this way if you want to. We'll pull off here and just say get controller. And there's your get controller function. And over here, we were casting to the player controller. We'd pull off here and say cast to player controller. Choose probably over here. Let's type it in the rest of my player controller. And then casting to the player controller needs this object to be returned. And then whenever we successfully do that as the player controller, we want to make a call to display this widget for WBP crafting. So you would come off of here and just say display, type, display widget. And then it just asks you for what widget you want. And again, we're looking for WBP underscore crafting. And once we find, whoops, WBP underscore crafting. Okay, and once we find the crafting widget there, we now have an interactable that when we hit the E key, will fire up this event to go into the crafting menu. So let's just go check that part out. Again, we're going to do this progressively so we can learn from it. So now we hit the E key and it pops up our craftables menu. Now we don't have anything to craft here. We don't have any required items. To fix that portion of it, what we want to do is we want to go into I want to close this vendor example here. We're going to go into our, there. We're going to go back into our campfire and we're going to add another component on here. And this is going to be our crafting components. This is ACF crafting. And our crafting component gives us the ability to put in recipes, item recipes. So if we add an item recipe to this, see it expanded all this down here. It's asking for an index and then, what it is from the index. Now, we don't have an item in there for the thing that we're about to make. And if we go back here and we look for recipes, there is a data table where we can go and add in what it is that we want to make. So we want to make cooked meat, okay? But if you look at the recipe, you have required items, item classes, and output items for an item class. Well, I can't set this up without having those other items. So what we want to do in order to get something that we can actually use here is we want to go and build a couple more blueprints for our meat. So go back up here. I'm just doing this in the content directory again because I have a lot of stuff, so it's just easy to see it all right here. So in this one, we want to get a new item. So we're going to go to blueprint class, and then we'll come down to our all classes expansion, and we're going to type in ACF item. And our ACF item is our basic ACF item here for, we're going to say raw meat. And actually, we'll call it ACF raw meat just to keep with the convention. So in our ACF raw meat, again, we're going to add a static mesh component. That static mesh is going to have a raw meat thing on here. So I have steaks in here from this other asset, and there's a raw steak. So my ACF meat's going to look like that. And as an ACF item, under the class defaults, we want to put a thumbnail on here. So I'm going to say, again, steak, and I'm going to get the raw steak thumbnail. And these don't translate real well in here, to be perfectly honest with you. I think there's something that I needed to do to set these up a little bit better. I probably have to like strip the texture or something in the background. But anyway, it's irrelevant. You guys can work on that piece. So I'm going to call this raw meat. And I could say like cook this at a local campfire or something. All right. And the world mesh for this, go to steak. We have a raw steak as the world mesh. And that's about all we need. We don't want to put this in an item slot because, again, we can't consume this yet until we've cooked it. So we don't want to be able to actually equip it or anything. We just want to have it in our inventory as something that we can use. So if I compile that, and I want to build another one, but this one for ACF, we want a blueprint again. And this one's actually going to be an ACF consumable. Excuse me, my voice just went. An ACF consumable. So we'll select an ACF consumable blueprint, and this is going to be called ACF cooked meat. And as ACF cooked meat, we'll do the same thing. We'll come in here and we'll add a static mesh component in here. Our static mesh for this one will be, again, we have the steaks and we have a cooked steak in here. Let's call it grilled. And as an ACF item, go to class defaults in here. As an ACF item, we want to have the steak grilled icon. Its name is going to be cooked meat. A delicious. Well, actually, let's call this. Doesn't really matter what I say here. We'll say a delicious treat that can heal wounds. Kind of funny. And then the world mesh for this. Again, we have a steak, and we're going to do a grilled steak. Now, that gives us that, but we also want to have in here an item slot where we can equip this too so that we can eat it. So we're going to say that this can go into an item slot, and our index here, we want to come down and say we want an item slot, and we'll put it in the consumable slot there. Item slot.consumable one. Now, that would make it so that we can pick it up and use it or whatever, but we also want to fill in the consumable aspect of this and change the stat modifier. So we're going to add a stat to this. The stat that we want to modify in here is going to be a statistic under the statistics section for health. So every time we eat this, we're going to add health to our character. And I'm just going to put, like, say, 50 health points from eating a cooked piece of meat. Okay? So if we got all that hooked up, now we can go to the recipes and we can go add a new recipe. Double click on here. We're going to call this cooked. Oops, I'll just do it in lowercase like he did. Cooked meat is our recipe. And the required item from ACF, we're going to do two members here. We're going to do wood, which is ACF wood that was already in there. And then we're going to add another item, which is going to be raw meat, ACF raw meat. And then the output item is going to be ACF cooked meat. And no crafting costs in here because we're not using currency, even though there is a currency system if you wanted to use that. And that should be it for filling the recipe, and the raw meat and the cooked meat are done. And now just in the campfire under that crafting menu again, we could just go back here and say what it is that it actually crafts. So in the recipes that we did earlier, the index for this would be cooked meat. And so when it goes to look up what can I make at this campfire, it should see that. Okay. I'm going to go back out here now. And if I walk up to the campfire, hit E, now it says, oh, you can make cooked meat. It's a delicious treat that can heal wounds. But you need wood and raw meat to do that, and you don't have all the needed materials to craft this item. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to go and get some of those items. So let's do a piece of raw meat out in the world. And now actually, that's not how ACF works. What you want to actually do here is to put the raw meat out there. You actually want to find something that's called the world item. And your ACF world item BP, you place that in the world, and then over here in the details panel, you can tell it what it is that it actually is. So under the general section here, excuse me, again, you have a static mesh. So here we want to do meat, and we're going to get our raw meat static mesh. And then down in the details section here, it also, under all, you can go and tell it what item you want from the ACF thing. So we're going to say that is actually a piece of ACF raw meat. And there's one of those there. And then we want to do the same thing with dragging this out. And let's just put a log on there. So we're going to call this back up here. And I know that there's a log icon in here, or a log static mesh for these trees. We'll do that one. And we'll just adjust its size to, let's do 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5, make it a little smaller. And if you want to, you can rotate it around and play with physics and all that kind of stuff. I did a video on how to do all that before. That stuff's all the same, so I'm not going to make it again. Fairly redundant. And then, again, we want to tell this exactly what that is in ACF. So in ACF, that item is ACF wood. So item class is ACF wood. And save that. And now when we hit the play button again, same thing, right? We go over here. This is what we need to make cooked meat, but we don't have all the items we need. So we leave here. We go out on our little adventure to find some raw meat. We take that into our inventory. We do the same thing with our wood. Look in the inventory now. We have raw meat and wood. Again, there's that icon, not translating right, but we have raw meat and wood, which is represented by a hammer in here. And we go over to our campfire, and we go to cook this, and we go item crafted successfully because we had all the things we needed. So now if we go and we look in our inventory, we have a piece of cooked meat, and we can now equip that so that it can be consumed. You can see cooked meat ×1 is down here. And now if I go out, if I hit the J key in ACF, you can see that the health is on the stats 779 out of 779. So I'm going to go and take a little bit of damage. I moved these other players way out here so that they wouldn't be attacking the car and the horse. Let's go out here and find those guys. Provoke one of them. Usually the guy with the bow and arrow will shoot me from here anyway. And give him a little incentive. Okay. So I just took a little damage. You can see my red bar is down a hair. And if I go to J, you can see I'm at 734, 779. Well, if I hit the 2 key, that consumes my meat. And you can see there that my red bar went back up. And if I go and I look at my J key, I'm at 779 to 779 because I healed back 50 points of damage, and I only had like 47 or 48 points, whatever that was on there. Okay, so that's how that all works. Hopefully you guys gained something from this video. And my name's TC Made with TC Gaming, and I'm going to be working on a new series for ACF called ACF Yourself, and it'll be pretty much from the ground up, hopefully giving you some more detailed information like this. A lot of the other videos I kind of raise to the surface to get you up and running, but with these I'll actually try and go in a little bit more detail and show you how some things work. So we'll do what we can. And thanks again for watching. You guys have a great night, and we'll see you in a future video. Take care.